Well, that is a lovely bow in Jen Gerson's hair.
Thank you. You got me as I was cleaning the kitchen, so of course my looks were paramount.
I am heading out in moments, so this is going to be a nice, tight, terse podcast. I'm heading out in moments to the final hockey tournament of the year, which means I always tell myself I only need 1 hour to get all the packing and logistics done. I'm on hour 3, and I'm not done yet. So it's an interesting week. I don't know if there's any huge news story this week that in isolation I would want to say a lot about, but there are a couple of big news stories that I think together are forming a pattern. Can I tell you
Hmm.
something I noticed this week?
Hit me.
So Roxham Road, the controversial irregular border crossing in Quebec, where Francois Legault, having secured re-election comfortably, is now totally comfortable being the happy Canadian federalist again. So he's playing ball with everybody. He's being very polite, very productive, working with Ontario, working with the feds. Pierre Poilievre jumping on that bandwagon to go after the Liberals, and the Liberals, Prime Minister included, is like, what, are you going to build a wall? Meanwhile, Chinese election interference allegations in the committees. The Liberal, I forget her name, Jennifer O'Connell, I think the MP from Ontario, is like,
Hmm.
this is Trumpian. You're questioning the integrity of our elections here. This is a new liberal messaging strategy. They are going to to see all these Trump references and a tonal shift in a matter of a week. You and I have been talking for months. The Liberals are in deep shit. I think this week we're seeing what they're going to try and do to turn this around. And the funny thing is, too, on Roxham Road, I think the prime minister is accurate in his criticisms of Poilievre. I think it's bang on accurate to go, you can't build a wall. All we're going to do is displace that problem. I think on Chinese election interference, saying any questions are Trumpian is a gigantic fuck you to the Canadian people. And I don't think that's going to work.
Well, it might work. That's the thing, right? Like if they triple down on this sort of everybody who is undermining our election win is engaged in some kind of misinformation or disinformation campaign, including the Globe and Mail, that actually strategy might be effective for them.
It'll win over the Shamrockers.
I suppose, but I don't know, like I think the Chinese election interference stuff is clearly hurting them more than they expected it to. And
Well,
here you have Trudeau's actually gone after CSIS,
yeah.
which of course is only gonna inspire more leaks because there's gonna be people within CSIS being like, well, fuck you,
Yeah.
And so like to me, this is just got the SNC level and scandal written all over it. It's a slow
Yeah.
boil kind of scandal that initially the government's going to try and the Globe allegations are false kind of thing, until eventually enough people come forward and start leaking on the story that it just becomes undeniable, and then they're going to have to ride out the wave of it.
You know what the best part of it is, actually? First of all, I agree entirely with that assessment. It's actually even worse for them, though, in one way. Global News and the Globe have both been getting scoops on this. The prime minister this week has basically come out against the whistleblowers. He wants CSIS to find out who's leaking. I have no reason to believe that the Globe or Global News has reported out the maximum of what
Oh
they
God, no,
already have.
no, God,
Right.
no.
So even if the PM puts the fear of God into CSIS, right, and scares the hell out of them, and the leaks stop, we could still have another half dozen Global News or Globe and Mail scoops coming out. And also, I just love watching journalism at work. And I know this is very inside baseball, but Stephanie Levitz in the Toronto Star this week didn't match the scoop on the elections interference front, but she got a great story talking to what conservatives were thinking doing during the 2021 election. There's going to be more of this.
Well, and we noted this in our last dispatch. So Waleed Solomon basically went to site, which was the
Yeah.
foreign interference committee that was effectively set up to try and stop the Russians from helping the conservatives. Waleed Solomon, who is I think the one of the campaign chairs of the Conservative Party, it's not the campaign chair, I'm getting his title wrong, but you know what I'm saying. He was up there. He was on this committee and was pointing out all the stuff that was going on, publicly and semi-hidden with Chinese interference. Reported it through the correct channels and basically went on Twitter saying, "You did nothing. You didn't care. They didn't give a shit."
I mean, in true Canadian fashion, they noted it.
They noted it,
And
and they promised to set up a task force in the future.
it looks like what the Globe got last week, a week ago today. We're recording this early on Friday before I got metamorphosized back into a tournament bunny. We had a week ago the Globe and Mail with that big A1 story where they broke the news. And what just jumps out at me is that it looks like the Globe, this is my inference. The documents the Globe seems to have seen seems to have been the belated CSIS report on exactly what Solomon and other conservatives were saying contemporaneously.
Yeah.
So they were going, this is happening right now. And CSIS is like, well, yeah, we'll check it out. And then sometime later, because I don't know when these Globe documents were from, CSIS comes up with a report that essentially bears out what the conservatives were saying at the time. And you and I should mention, we're not going to blow any sources here. Let's just say this very mildly. In 2021, the fact that the Chinese were interfering in the election was known. This is not something you and I
wrote about it. Even we wrote about it.
Yeah.
Right after the election, because this was not subtle. There was stuff that was making the rounds on Weibo and Chinese language chats. I mean, we even had Karimvir Lal, who was a great data nerd. He broke down exactly which writings was most swayed by the Chinese disinformation campaigns, and actually found a really fascinating tidbit, and that was, I believe it was Cantonese speaking writings that seemed to have been most swayed. And Mandarin writings were less swayed. And his conclusion from that was that the disinformation campaigns were largely ineffective. I think you could come out with a different conclusion based on that analysis. But this was not real subtle stuff. This has been publicly known about since 2021.
Yeah, even at the time, like during the election, people were whispering some weird shit's happening in some heavily Chinese language.
And right after the election, MP Chu, I believe, came out and said a Chinese disinformation campaign cost me my seat. Now, I don't necessarily think that the disinformation campaign was effective enough to sway the overall outcome of the election.
I don't think it was. I think the evidence is that it wasn't.
No, the evidence is that it wasn't. But it certainly probably did cost a couple of seats for the conservatives.
Well, I was tweeting the other day where, like, a little story I like to tell, made up, but it's kind of my way of summarizing Canadian complacency, which is like, imagine you've retired to the country and you've got this beautiful house with a big wraparound deck, and you're out there and you're drinking your morning coffee and you're like, my God, life is good. I'm loving being retired. You're in your robe, you're in your fuzzy slippers. And then you notice a couple hundred meters away that your neighbor is aiming a gun at your house and he's shooting and all these bullets are whizzing by. And you're thinking, well, that's unusual activity in a neighbor. And you call the cops, and the cops come and they go, yeah, well, he missed, right?
Yeah.
You're like, well, yeah, he missed. He's a terrible shot. And they're like, well, yeah, call us if he hits something. And then you talk to your other neighbors and you're like, hey, like, does my neighbor, like the guy in the red house over there, he was shooting at me. Oh yeah, that's just Jim. He does that. Don't worry though. He's got terrible aim. He never hits anything. Every couple of weeks, he just likes to shoot at the neighbors. Canadian, like, someone tried to do a bad thing to us, but they maybe weren't that successful. And the response of our federal government is, ah!
Well, I mean, I think this is also the parallels app here, because remember when everybody was freaking out about Russian disinformation and interference in the American election, and that being a factor in electing Trump. I think the overwhelming sense is, yes, of course, Russia tried to interfere. Whether or not they interfered effectively enough to sway the overall outcome of the elections, that's a pretty suspect position. They probably didn't. Trump probably would have been elected even if there had been no interference. But that didn't stop everybody from losing their goddamn minds. And in fact, even the liberals set up their own, an equivalent committee. The big tech, Google and Facebook, all clamped down on incidents of foreign interference. They started clamping down on election stuff. And speaking of big tech, because I think that's the other interesting and tangentially related topic to come out today. Of course, it sounds like in response to Bill C-18, which of course we've written about and I've testified against in committee in the House of Commons. In case people are not aware of this, essentially, this is a legislation that is loosely based on the Australian model that tries to force companies like Google and Facebook and potentially even Twitter to compensate legacy media employees for using their links. There's a whole bunch of philosophical problems with this and practical problems with this, but the most obvious one, and the one I testified to, and everybody was warning the government was going to happen for the last several months, was if you use legislative power to force an artificial value onto these links, these companies are going to respond in the totally rational way, and that is they're just going to stop spreading these links. They're going to stop using the thing that you've attached this artificial value to. And Facebook has more or less come right out and said this, and said, initially there was some deals struck up in the Australian market, but since then Facebook has basically said, we can't replicate this in every mid-tier media market. News links simply do not make up enough of our overall content churn to justify spending hundreds of millions of dollars per country compensating legacy media outlets. Also, the news, as an aside, the news links aren't actually what provide the value. What Facebook has done is they've eaten our classified ads. Mm-hmm. That's what's eaten the value. It's not the actual news content. They've eaten the stuff that has subsidized that news content, which is advertising. So this is it apportions value in really, really weird ways, and it disincentivizes these major big tech companies from giving us the free distribution to our content, which is why people like me have been like, yeah, if you pass this, Facebook and Google and all these companies are not going to pay all of these media companies around the world, Canada, Australia, England, all these hundreds of millions of dollars to distribute content that has no value to them. That makes no sense. So they're just going to start cutting people off, which apparently is what Google is now signaling that it's going to do. It's going to effectively start throttling content. So now, of course, everybody's switching from Google is evil because they're using our links and using our links for their own value. So now all of a sudden, when Google stops using those links so that it doesn't have to pay the value, they're like, Google is throttling access to our content. Yeah. And it's really funny, but the actual problem here for people like you and I is that you and I don't want C18. We don't want to force use regulatory capture to force big tech to subsidize us. We think that the only viable economic model for us is subscriber supported content.
Subscribe today, folks.
Subscribe today. Please pay for the line. But the problem is that now if all of these big tech companies are going to start throttling links, they're not going to pick and choose, we'll throttle the Toronto Stars links, but not the lines. They're just going to throttle everybody, including small media startups, yeah, who are hugely dependent on social media for distribution because they don't have necessarily the legacy footprint that a lot of these older media organizations have. So essentially, if you continue with C18, we all get fucked. And then what is essentially going to happen is honestly what I think will happen next is the government is going to respond to the throttling by saying evil big tech is throttling media content as a result of our ham-handed legislation. So therefore, they're just going to start writing checks. They're going to start writing big checks to Post Media and Toronto Star. And you and I have speculated in the recent past about the layoffs that are now expected at Post Media and just why those are not going well. And we use some words that we don't want to repeat in the podcast for fear of libel actions being taken against us. But if you wanted to ask me why I think there's a bit of a holdup here, I think it might be because some of these companies are just expecting the unqualified checks to be dropped in the mail. And then the throttling that's happening with big tech, it becomes the political pretext for doing it.
Two points I'm going to make in return here. First of all, I posed a thought experiment on Twitter last night for Minister Rodriguez, Pablo Rodriguez, the Heritage Minister who's overseeing this. What I'm wondering about is in the worldview of Rodriguez and the Rodriguezes, what should big tech do to not owe legacy media money? Okay, I'm just trying to wonder here, what is the thing that they can do that leaves them not owing Post Media, Torstar, Globe Mail any bucks? Because it just seems to me that basically the government's position is the links on your websites to traditional news, you owe them money for posting those links. This is completely ass backwards. This is the exact opposite of how things actually make sense in the real world. But even within the logic of the liberal position here, which is again totally backwards, the big tech companies go, all right, well, if you say that there's value to the links, we shall simply no longer post them, and then we won't owe them any money. And the government's outraged. So again,
and so are the media companies.
Yeah. Thought experiment. What is the position big tech can take that leaves them owing zero to the legacy media? And the answer, of course, is that there is no such position. The liberals did this whole thing backwards. The desired outcome was big tech subsidizes failing legacy media. everything else that they've done since then is trying to find a semi-plausible rationale for exactly that. But let's also, the second point I would make is, let's just review how that's going. There are three problems here. First of all, it's a bad idea in practice. Second of all, even though it's a bad idea in practice, it's not working. Third, even if it worked, it would just create a new set of equally fatal problems.
Yeah.
Like, there is no winning scenario for this plan.
Well, I don't know if you're giving them too much credit or too little, but I know that the government knows or had been warned that this was going to fail along very predictable lines. And I know that because I testified at this committee where I was like, if you put this in place, they're just going to shut the link sharing down because, like, there's no value add here for them. And what that would inadvertently do, not only to the legacy companies, but to the startup companies like mine, like The Line, is it screws us all over because now we've lost hugely valuable distribution networks because fundamentally you've misallocated where the value lies in these services.
Yeah.
So, like, me and smart people have been screaming this from the rooftops at parliamentary committees for a long time that this was going to happen. And, like, Facebook bluntly has not been terribly subtle. Like, they've stated this both, how should I say this? What can I say? Through public channels and through backroom channels that I'm aware of. They have stated this none too subtly.
Yeah.
And that is, we're losing money, we're laying off our own workforces, and we think that the future's in the metaverse. The future's not in sharing news content.
Links.
Yeah. So like if you put us in a situation where you're going to ask us to hand over $100 million every year to every mid-tier media market, the answer is going to be bye-bye news links because there's no value there for them.
Nobody puts Fabi in a corner.
And everybody has been warning this. Everybody has been saying like this is what they're going to do. Why would they bluff? And the answer has been like, well, they bluffed in Australia. And like, okay, they kind of did, they kind of didn't. But the problem here is now you're asking them to replicate the Australian model in every other country, exponentially growing their liability assets. There's a certain point where Facebook's just going to be like handing over, like basically giving all these media companies a blank check in every country in which we operate is not a sustainable business model for us. And they're just going to risk the bad PR and walk away because it's the only rational business decision to make.
The PR would blow over in a week.
The PR would blow over in a week because, like, bluntly, media companies aren't that popular or less popular than Facebook. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, it's like you have a bunch of big dicks in the room who aren't accustomed to the idea that they're no longer the big dicks in the room. And this is what's going to happen. So, like, I can't believe the government didn't know that this was inevitably going to happen. So either they're really, really dumb, and all of the media executives who are pushing for C18 are really dafter than I gave them credit for, or they knew exactly that this was going to happen. Their response is basically pre-written. They'll be like, well, goddamn those evil big tech media companies. We can't have them throttling access to our media in order to save democracy. And they're just going to use this as a political pretext to write a giant fucking check.
The fun part is, even if they write the giant fucking check, it's too late. I think some of these media companies are past the effective point of no return.
It's too late to save the media companies as viable media companies. But it's not too late for the Liberal government to avoid the bad publicity that would involve them dying on their watch.
Yep.
And it certainly isn't too late to buy a little bit of goodwill from the media companies that remain ahead of the next election.
I mean, my gut feeling is that what we're in here is that they have concluded that the Liberals, I should say, that it does not suit their political interests for the media to be thriving, but it also does not suit their political interests for the media to be dead. So a half-dead zombie media on life support, preserved just before the moment natural death would occur, is the best.
That's their best outcome. And they're going to cut exactly a large enough check to keep some of these major media organizations just thriving enough to squelch any kind of media competition from startups that would be uncontrollable and predictable and probably meaner to them.
Yeah.
Like I either this is really, really dumb or it's really, really smart, depending on how much credit you want to give the government.
Yeah.
But the fact that the media executives are literally too dumb to realize that they're being played here is like that I would believe. Anyway,
Yeah.
happy thoughts.
No, I mean, look, you're bang on. All of this fits the pattern that you and I have been talking about a lot in recent weeks, which is that there's a real whiff of death attached to the Liberals right now. The only thing that's going to save the Liberals is going to be the Conservatives fucking it up. And I don't rule that out because I think there's always a really good chance the Conservatives find a way to fuck things up. But if the Liberals were left to their own devices, they're on the glide path right into the side of a mountain. One of the other interesting stories, I'll just mention this briefly, is that 3 Conservative MPs, the only one who I remembered offhand was Leslyn Lewis, met with like a far right German.
Yeah, I literally was writing that dodown.
And
who's like not a well-known figure to me, but apparently is a big heroic figure among the trucker sort of conservative.
Yeah, someone you could Google.
Yeah.
Like there every once in a while we get surprised when we find out what certain people believe in private. This ain't that. This is pretty much someone with pretty clear far right links. What's interesting, look, I don't think there's anything interesting in the fact that there's crackpots in the Conservative caucus, like film at 11, right? There's no news there. What I do think is interesting is the very muted response from Pierre Poilievre. And I think it's interesting for 2 reasons. First of all, it's very muted. Second of all, there was a response. So I think, like, Mr. Poilievre has obviously a very, this is my own analysis, but there's very obviously a strategy of I'm not going to fight on my right flank. And I'm willing to put up with a lot of bullshit on my right flank. And I'm going to count on the fact that most people aren't on Twitter. And I'm going to take the hits. I'm going to ignore the bozo eruptions. And every time I'm saying anything, I'm going to be talking about how bad Justin Trudeau is. And I think that actually could work.
Yeah, I think that's a decent strategy.
Yeah, I think so.
Which is not to say it's a moral strategy.
Strategy. Oh yeah, no, I think like it could be an electorally successful strategy, but there are going to be limits to that. And I think it's just fascinating to see what we might be starting to see a bit of a sci-fi reference for you here, the outer limits of that strategy. Like when what is it? CIJA, which one? CIJA, Canadian Israeli Jewish. Like I don't remember. Like it's one of the large Jewish advocacy groups in Canada is calling out the Conservatives. I was just like, oh, okay. I was just really curious to see how the Conservatives would respond to this, and what they've responded with is interesting. Pierre Poilievre has a statement out where he attacks the German far right lady, and basically says, yeah, my MP shouldn't have met with her. And then he's like, it would have been better if she was never even in the country because she's a racist. So he's trying, like, I see exactly what he's doing here. Condemn the racism, have a position that you think is defensible, but don't really pick a fight with your own caucus here.
Well, the other interesting thing about this is, like, I don't really understand why these MPs made a point of, like, standing in a line with her for a picture. Like, why do politicians do this?
Because they're owning the libs, Jen.
I just you want to go listen to this far right figure. Okay, listen to anybody you want, but maybe don't what? Why?
To own the libs. They know what they're doing.
All right, fair enough.
I mean, they know exactly what they're doing. I don't think we should underestimate how much of the modern conservative movement is basically animated by 19-year-old level fuck you pranks.
No, that's fair.
I'm doing this to make the libs angry
and make them look crazy.
Yeah,
I'm going to try and provoke them into madness, which kind of seems to be working, which is a theme of the tweet that you made today, which I think should be the overarching structure of our dispatch this week.
Which one?
The one where you were just like, hey, the state of play in politics today is that the CPC went nuts. The CPC is winning. This is making the Liberals go nuts. And that's going to make the CPC win more likely.
Yep. No, yeah. I mean, that it was just
I think that's actually the theme behind all of our little dispatch notes today.
Yeah, no, and that was just a tweet. I finished watching Star Trek Picard last night because that's how I party on Thursday, and I had I don't drink much during the week. I have maybe 1 or 2 drinks a week, and I had a beer last night, which is nice. I had a beer and I watched a Star Trek episode, and it was done. And I was thinking of going to bed, but I wasn't tired yet, and I was just kind of ruminating on all the big stories of the week, and what I just kind of came up with, because I confess, look, I could be wrong. For all I know, Trudeau's going to win a majority in the next election, and I'm going to look like an idiot because I've been saying for 8 months now that I think he's in trouble.
Well, he is in trouble, and he could have the stench of death, and they could still win.
Yeah, I guess that's let's underline this and snip that for future possible butt covering. I just get the feeling they're losing. And I was thinking, I went and dug this up. I made a note of this now. Jerry Butts, a former top advisor to the Prime Minister, who actually, by the way, agreed with my Twitter assessment and said, yes, that's basically, he endorses my summary of the current state of Canadian politics. He had this great tweet years ago.
You're a real journalist, unlike the Globe and Mail.
Yeah, exactly. Us post-media veterans.
Yeah, exactly.
The real journalists. He had this tweet years ago that I made a note of, and I went and I dug it up, and I just thought it was such a profoundly interesting insight, which is, I think I've told you this before. What Jerry said was simply that people do weird things when they're losing. And he was talking about Stephen Harper doing a weird cash giveaway thing with Rob Ford in 2015. And Jerry said they knew they were losing, and people do weird things when they're losing. Everything I look at from the Liberals over the last few months, people do weird things when they're losing. And they still might eke out a victory because, like I said, I never underestimate the ability of Conservatives to fuck themselves. But right now, the Liberals are not in control of their own fate. They might get lucky, but I think they know they're not steering the ship, and they're at the mercy of events. And people do weird things when they're losing.
On that note, I've got 2 questions to put forward to you, but not when we're actually doing the recording. I actually think we should pin it there. But I think that people do weird things when we're losing is the overall structure of this particular dispatch, and then we kind of slot all the different little blurbs into that structure. You were going to talk about Poet, but you're going to do that in a column when you're finished reading through the whole.
Oh, Poet column. Honestly, I should have done it this week, except
well, we got some great Ukraine stuff, and
well, that's it. I forgot it was the anniversary.
Yeah. No,
So
that's fair.
So we ended up running some,
which is fine because it actually gave you an opportunity to properly read it. I've got a thing coming about what's happening with all of the First Nations stuff, changing the anthem, all that kind of stuff. I don't really want to put that in the dispatch because we're going to save that for a column.
Okay.
And then I think we've got a couple things in the bank for next week. Then.
Oh, we've already got a lot of content in the bank. The news is out. We publish one piece a day. Our idea has always been one interesting, meaty piece a day. We could be publishing multiple pieces a day right now. We're turning stuff away that's good because we don't have the time to publish it. Which is kind of funny because like some weeks we get nothing and we're just like, how are we going to get one piece a day out? What are we doing? And then some weeks it's like, oh, fuck, we got like 20 pieces. Yeah. It's very funny. Feast or famine.
Feast or famine. Right. That's the game.
Well, if you want to talk off the air, let's just wrap this up. And then, no, I agree with you. Read the dispatch. That's where I think it comes together as well.
Okay, and then I'll do the media stuff.
Great.
Maybe I'll do the Christine Anderson stuff too.
Christine Anderson, what's that?
Oh, that's I think that's her name. The far right.
Oh, the German
lady.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so I'll do because I think that's a relatively short blurb, but
check out Brian Lilly's Twitter feed. He had I don't know if it was given directly to him or if he tweeted it, but he was the one who had the statement from Polyev.
Okay, and then I'll do a nice meaty thing on the media situation, just basically going "told you so."
Yeah, and I'll do the people are weird when they're losing.
People are weird when they're losing, and then
I'll slot some stuff into that. Yeah,
slot Roxham Road and Chinese allegation stuff in there.
Yeah,
especially. Oh, also, you really want to make a note as well as the CSIS. Oh, yeah. The weird comments that Justin Trudeau's made about CSIS as well.
Yeah, which could not have done more to promote more links. Links.
We really appreciate it. That's great. And also the fact that he's kind of taken on this Trumpian tone here. I mean, at this point, I'm half expecting CSIS to start leaking to us. They're going to be so pissed.
Hey, they know where to find us.
They know where to find us.
All right. Well, thanks, Sam. I'm off to the rink, but I'll talk with you briefly and we'll get everything organized.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, everybody.